In this video, we're going all the way back to New York City, 1999. We're going to explore the Remote Lounge Project, which was a telepresence surveillance themed bar concept that I developed with my partners, and it was a tremendously bizarre and interesting life experience.
Welcome to Remote Lounge.
At first it looks like any other bar in the East Village, but just by going in the front door, a visitor to the Remote Lounge becomes part of a multi-layered cyberspace experience.
Well, there is a new bar in New York City where at least the looking part is made easy.
There is a new night spot in New York designed to bring out both the voyeurs and the exhibitionists.
This I've got to see. It gives an all-new meaning to the term bar scene.
It's being called closed-circuit flirting. We take you to New York, where being a voyeur is in vogue.
Aren't you glad you're married?
Now you have to remember, New York City in the late 90s was an incredible place to be an entrepreneur. There was this energy and electricity in the air that just made you feel like you could take a bucket and just go to Lower Broadway and scoop cash out of this imaginary river that was just flowing down the middle of Broadway. It was amazing. So the whole concept of internet streaming media was just starting to bubble, and nobody knew exactly what it was going to be or where it was going to go, but it was clear that it was seriously important, and getting in on it in any way you could was essential if you didn't want to miss the boat. In the early day on the internet, streaming video barely worked. It still barely works. So it just didn't make any sense. But yet, it had all this investment money behind it and a huge bunch of excitement that people really believed in. Every science fiction movie has video conferencing, but in reality, only a few people have actually ever done it. Have you ever done it? So it was around this time that I got introduced to Josh Harris.
When the press called around, I was the smartest guy in town, and the reporters knew it. I was a regular on CNN, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, USA Today, the Los Angeles Times, International Press, etc., etc.
Our business is to take you guys out. I'm in a race to take CBS out of business.
Josh was a superstar in the multimedia internet scene. He started Jupiter Communications and then Pseudo, and the rest is history. There's actually a film made about him called We Live in Public, which I recommend watching if you're at all curious. Now, I had just started a new company with Robert Stratton and Kevin Santani. Josh approached me at a social event to ask me if I wanted to get involved in the Quiet Project. Now, Quiet Project was an amazing 2-week party that occurred in the basement of a building on 353 Broadway. And for that project, Josh wanted us to wire up these sort of concentration camp style Japanese capsule hotel pods, that was what they were called colloquially, with monitors and cameras such that they could become an interactive experience. And we didn't really know how to do this. Obviously, we've never done this before. My partner Kevin suggested a brilliant idea, which was, why don't we create an in-house cable TV network? So that's what we did. We bought a cable TV head end that had, I believe, 77 UHF channels and a bunch of cheap black and white surveillance cameras and the cheapest TV sets we could find. Combining all this with a shit ton of wire, we were able to make a very crude but effective sort of multi-channel live communication system that really worked very well.
You change the channel, it changes you to other compartments in here. If you're both locked on the same channel, you can talk to each other.
So it was during this Quiet Project when I had the realization that people really like doing this. There's a certain fun factor that is profound. And that really was what convinced me that turning this into some kind of commercial enterprise was a really good idea. So when the quiet project was finally over, Josh very graciously gave us the cable TV head end. He had no use for it. He knew that we might do something interesting with it.
Using a joystick and channel selector, it's possible to see through and manipulate every camera in the room. When you find someone you like the look of, you press a button to ask them if they want to chat.
You can capture moments that you may not want to remember the next day by taking snapshots from your control station, and those priceless images go straight to their website.
You guys are looking good over there.
We realized very quickly while developing Remote Lounge that we had to look at this as if it was a theater piece or a carnival ride, that the technology had to serve the idea rather than the other way around. We had to pull it off with a relatively limited budget, so it was very important that we had the right attitude as we approached things.
Some of my friends have asked, is this the digital bar? And in fact, I call it the analog bar instead, because a lot of the technology is analog, and that's one of the reasons that we think it works very well.
This is our closed-circuit television system here, and it really is a cable head-end television system. And what we do is all the cameras and all the feeds from all the videos and the DVD decks and the computer-generated imagery run into here, and then get combined onto a single signal, and then they go out to all the monitors upstairs. And the monitors upstairs have tuners in them. They can pick out any channel from the combined signal.
All the hardware had to be cheap, readily available, and very robust. This led us to selecting off-the-shelf consumer electronics and video game parts as the main staples of our design. The double-sided interactive consoles are the main feature. Each station consists of a video monitor, pan-tilt video camera, telephone handset, joystick and push buttons, and a 128 by 64 pixel text display. A super important aspect is getting the cameras to work right in a low light environment like a bar. You don't want to feel like you're sitting under bright lights while you're trying to enjoy your cocktail. But you want the visual experience on the screen to be rich and interesting. You want to see what's going on. We quickly realized that color cameras were out of the question. Not only did they look terrible under those lighting conditions, but everyone tends to look better in black and white anyway. It just evens out the skin tones and just makes things look more beautiful. The cheapest black and white cameras often worked the best because they lacked infrared filters, so they would respond really strongly to infrared light. We also discovered that the incandescent lamps in our illuminated push buttons could work like a makeup light if we dimmed them down a little bit. All that infrared just lights up your face brilliantly, but you still have the sense that you're sitting in a dark and cozy place. The pan-tilt cameras themselves we ended up building out of model airplane servos and printed circuit board material. All the other pan-tilt cameras we could find were either huge or way too expensive.
The heart of the thing is what we call our console controller, and it's a custom-built proprietary microcontroller-based board. And it's the thing that reads all the switches and lights all the lights and controls all the different things that are on the cocktail consoles. Each of these boards and each of these consoles talks back to a control computer that's located downstairs in the basement. And each of the consoles can talk to that computer, and that computer knows who's on what channel, who wants to talk to who, how your joystick is controlling another camera, and all the other possibilities.
Here's the entire block diagram for a console. For example, pushing a channel up or down button tells the console controller you want to change channels. It then generates infrared remote control signals that are beamed at the TV's infrared receiver. The TV then tunes to the incoming cable TV signal and displays it on the monitor. The composite video output of the camera is fed to a balanced differential line driver, which pipes the signal down the Cat5 cable to the control room. A differential receiver then connects to the video input of a cable TV modulator. The accompanying audio for that channel comes from a current loop receiver, which connects to the microphone in the handset. The earpiece connects directly to the TV's audio output. The console controller communicates its status over a glacially slow 9600 baud RS-232 serial link to the master control computer. All the analog and serial control signals run over Cat5 twisted pair cables. Both the audio and video transmitter systems are powered from the back end over the cables themselves, and they're completely isolated and floating from all the other electrical components. This ensures that there can be no ground loops or other nastiness that typically plague this kind of analog signal distribution system. The master control computer was a standard PC running Linux. The actual program was written in Perl. The program communicates over Ethernet with a multi-port terminal server, which is basically a way to add tons of serial ports to a computer. Our particular unit had 32 serial ports. The computer also contained a standard TV tuner card, which people used to use to watch TV on their computers, if you can imagine that. This card forms the heart of the photo capture system of the remote lounge. When you press the camera button on your console, this card would capture a still JPEG image of whatever channel you were looking at and immediately load it up to the website. The bar also contained more than 70 ambient video monitors that were used to display console images and other video content. The console controller board could control up to 16 monitors by using its infrared output and the lamp drivers as a multiplexer. We could then tune any TV to any channel via serial command sent from the control room. Bob Stratton created a great little user interface program that allowed people to easily take control of patching signals from sources to the TVs. For the project, I had to design several pieces of hardware. I had to design things that didn't exist and other little bits and pieces that were available but either really awkward to connect and configure or just too expensive. The solution was to create dedicated problem-solving modules that all plugged in together in a neat and clean way that made everything go together without bleeding from the eyeballs. All of the wiring was based on Cat5 and telephone wiring technology. We used a lot of punch blocks and a lot of Cat5 RJ45 patch cables. We based all of our connector systems around this so we could use really cheap, simple wiring solutions to connect everything all together. Our offices were located above the bar, so that made it easy to tap into signals and play God. Me and my friend Robert Galinsky created a show called The Small Time Gang, where we would terrorize bar patrons with random insanity. So the remote lounge initially was scheduled to open early September of 2001. And as we all know, the events of the 11th day of that month changed everything. We had to delay our opening about a month while the dust literally settled. When we did finally open, the media went absolutely bananas over the remote lounge concept. It seemed the world needed a fluffy feel-good story to distract from the horror that we'd all been through. So as a result, my press book here is absolutely jammed with articles and stories about the remote lounge. It was totally insane. I spent the next probably year and a half after that doing interviews and talking to people about all these crazy things that would pop up out of the woodwork. Someone sees it on TV, and the next thing you know, somebody wants to invest, somebody wants to franchise, someone wants to open another location. They wanted to do a reality TV show about it. It was just a total circus for that period of my life. Ah, yes, but as we tend to learn as we go through life, enthusiasm is very inexpensive. Most of the stuff that came our way was just noise. We wasted a lot of time entertaining ridiculous people with ridiculous ideas, but in the end, really not much came from it. For me, one of the most interesting aspects of the whole remote experience was kind of having a laboratory where I could watch these techno-social interactions going on with people that had grown up with television, who were completely used to this idea of TV as a one-way consumer medium. They're now getting to explore this bi-directional concept that only a few people had experienced, because nobody really had the internet bandwidth in those days. And maybe you worked at some fancy company where they had a video conferencing setup, but by and large, the public had never done that before. So this whole idea is very new. So one of the things that happened that was very intriguing to me was I was sitting at a console with a group of people, and there's a beautiful woman with us, and she's getting a lot of attention. Her camera's really getting nervous, it's starting to buzz. And at one point, she pulls out her breast and exposes herself to the camera. So everyone at this console glues their eyes to the image of her breast on the TV monitor. Nobody looked directly at this beautiful woman because I realized that that's uncomfortable. That's crossing some social boundaries. But as TV-soaked creatures, we feel completely guilt-free watching anything on a TV monitor. That is what television has taught us, that we're not guilty of what we see on TV. The other thing that's really fascinating for me was learning about female psychology. I never realized this subtle competition that's always going on between females to see who's the most sexy and attractive. This tended to escalate to the point of absurdity. Our bar security staff spent a lot of time telling people to put their clothes back on, which is not a normal occurrence in a bar. When we were developing a remote lounge, a lot of people had a very strong critique about the idea that there would be these consoles so close together. Like, why would you want a video conference with someone who's 10 feet away? It makes no sense. But the reality of it is that that made absolutely no difference. In fact, it was kind of fun because the perception you have through the monitor and the camera is so different from the real perception you have with your eyes that it seemed as if that person was in another universe. Even though they might be sitting right next to you, you didn't get that sense that you were just talking to the person next to you. And actually, when you discovered that the person was just next to you, that made it even more fun because now all of a sudden it's like, ha ha, they're right there. And it was really interesting how well that idea worked. Even though they were all packed in to a very small space, I never felt that that was any kind of a problem. Looking back on all this now, 20 years later, I'm struck by how much drama and fun and excitement we created with this very simple, very inexpensive, relatively, system that we created out of all this sort of basically consumer stuff that we kind of cobbled together. And I also wonder then now, if I was to do it again, how would I approach this technically? What would be the different strategy that I would take to make this all happen? The logical conclusion might be to say, oh, well, let's just make an app, like a phone app. That's the remote phone app. You see a lot of people at parties anyway, sitting in the dark corners playing with their phones, so why couldn't it be like something like that? And I really think that that wouldn't work. I think that you need to transcend the physical experience of your phone. What made remote fun was the sort of the physicality of it, the fact that it was big enough that 3 people could sit at this thing and one person could be playing with the phone, and another person's jiggling the joystick, and the other person's mugging it up for the camera. It had this scale that was socially inclusive. And I think that's one of the reasons that it really worked. And I think if you're going to contemplate doing this idea again, you really have to pay very close attention to those subtle design details that can really make the difference between success and failure. People often ask me, well, what happened to remote? And I'll sum it up simply. Remote suffered from a critical mass problem. And what I mean by that is, like on a Friday or Saturday night when there's 50 to 100 people in the bar, it's really fun. You get sucked into this whole adventure and you have a great time. But let's say it's Monday after work at like 6, and you go in there and you're like the first person to walk into the bar. you walk into this very uncomfortable hall of mirrors where you see yourself, and it's very oppressive. There's nothing else to do but to feel self-conscious. And inevitably, that caused the remote clientele to shun those hours of business. And that started on Monday, and then little by little it started to happen on Tuesday, and by the end of it, like the place was a graveyard until, you know, Friday night at 10 o'clock. And of course, you know, it is kind of a gimmick, so gimmicks do have a limited lifespan, and that's all I'll say about that. Wow, that was quite a journey back into time for me. I really feel blessed to have lived in New York City during that incredible time and to have been part of this community of people doing all these really amazing things, and for all the successes and the failures. It's been an incredible ride. Anyway, thank you very much for watching my video. Please support my channel, like and subscribe, help me grow. Thank you very much.
This is put society to the extreme. So, I mean, in normal society you are being watched, but you don't know. And maybe society is going to be like this in like 20 years, I don't know.